The global economy is no longer just at risk, it is officially in the early stages of a systemic energy shock that dwarfs the 2022 Russia-Ukraine crisis. On this Friday, March 6, 2026, Brent crude futures have surged past $91 per barrel, marking a weekly gain of over 20%, the largest spike since the early days of COVID-19. The cause? Operation Epic Fury has effectively frozen the Strait of Hormuz. But the real disaster isn't just the price, it's the physical reality on the ground. Kuwait has officially begun cutting oil output because its storage tanks are full. They simply cannot load the crude onto tankers because the exit is blocked. Qatar's energy minister, Saad Al-Kaabi, has just issued a chilling warning. If this continues for just a few more days, every single energy exporter in the Gulf will be forced to declare force majeure. This is a chain reaction of economic failure that could send oil soaring past $150 a barrel and bring global GDP growth to a grinding halt. We are witnessing the 25-day countdown to chaos. Iraq has already slashed production by half, and Qatar has shut down its massive gas liquefaction plants after drone strikes hit their Ras Laffan facility. This isn't a temporary glitch in the matrix. Even if the war stopped tomorrow, experts at UBS and Goldman Sachs warn that it would take at least 2 months to return to normal logistics. The world is running out of time, running out of storage, and running out of energy buffers. I'm Camilo Motato, reporting for Thu News. As a certified public accountant, I look at a crisis through the lens of contractual liability and asset impairment. When a minister mentions force majeure, they are admitting that a catastrophic event has made it impossible to fulfill their legal obligations. In any audit, if you can't deliver the product and your storage is at 100% capacity, you have reached operational insolvency. Today, we are auditing the Gulf's energy ledger. We are looking at the technical cost of shutting in a well, a measure of last resort that risks permanent damage to reservoir pressure and incurs astronomical restart costs. This is the ultimate going concern risk for the global economy. Let's examine the inventory bottleneck. Data provider Kepler confirms that Kuwaiti storage will be completely full in about 12 days. As a CPA, I track the flow of goods. Middle Eastern storage is limited. When the Strait of Hormuz closes, the inventory turnover hits zero. To avoid tanks running over, countries like Kuwait and Iraq have no choice but to curb production. But here is the professional nightmare. You cannot just turn off an oil well like a faucet. Shutting in a reservoir can cause long-term damage to the pressure needed to extract the oil. Restarting can take weeks. We are looking at a physical destruction of productive capacity that could haunt the markets for years, not just weeks. As we audit the current energy landscape, a terrifying pattern is emerging: the total breakdown of international cooperation. In past crises, the world looked to the International Energy Agency or coordinated releases from strategic petroleum reserves to stabilize prices. But on March 6, 2026, the ledger shows a different reality. Every country for itself. The United States is facing a massive liquidity trap with its own strategic petroleum reserve. While President Trump may order a release, the volume is limited and cannot offset a potential loss of 8 to 10 million barrels per day if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. We are currently on day 10 of a 25-day countdown to actual global panic. If the disruption hits the 25-day mark, the risk premium won't just be a number on a screen, it will be a physical shortage that stops the gears of industry. Now let's look at the counterparty risk involving China. According to energy economist Anas Al-Haji, the world was counting on China to release its massive oil inventories to balance the market. But as a professional auditor, I see a strategic pivot occurring in Beijing. China is likely to restrict its own exports to ensure its domestic economy doesn't collapse. If China bans the export of refined products and keeps its oil inland, the global supply gap isn't just a deficit, it's a vacuum. China's exposure to Gulf oil is alarming, and if the conflict persists, Beijing could face a financial crisis that morphs into a global depression. In accounting terms, the global inventory we thought we had is being locked behind national borders, leaving the rest of the world to fight over the remaining scraps. There is a dangerous myth that if the war stops tomorrow, the prices will drop on Monday. As a CPA, I have to flag this as a material misrepresentation of operational reality. First, restart costs. Shutting in an oil well is a measure of last resort because it risks permanent damage to the reservoir's pressure. Second, timeline. Even with a resolution today, it would take at least 2 months to return to normal logistics and technical operations. Third, the diesel spike. Diesel futures are already up 40% this week. This isn't just expensive gas. Diesel is what moves the world's food, medicine, and construction materials. When diesel spikes 40% in 5 days, you are looking at a chain reaction of factory closures and product shortages that will hit every American household within weeks. The force majeure declared by Qatar isn't just a legal escape, it's the official recognition that the global energy engine has seized up. As we continue our audit of the global energy shock, we must examine the policy ledger of central banks. Before Operation Epic Fury, the markets were pricing in a series of interest rate cuts to support a cooling labor market. But that reality has been completely liquidated. Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan are now warning that the 20% weekly spike in Brent crude, exceeding the initial shock of the Ukraine war, has created an inflationary floor that cannot be ignored. As a CPA, I recognize this as a systemic hedge. Central banks are now warning of a massive inflation spike that effectively halts any plans for rate cuts. If they cut rates now, they fuel the fire of rising energy costs. If they hold rates high, they accelerate the recession already visible in the 4.5% unemployment rate. This is policy paralysis. We are looking at a scenario where borrowing costs for Americans remain stratospheric, while the price of every energy-dependent good, from bread to building materials, rises daily. Let's follow the money to see who is actually in the black during this crisis. While the typical American family sees their purchasing power evaporate at the pump, a specific sector of the economy is seeing a windfall. Diesel futures have surged 40% this week alone. In accounting, we look for windfall profits. American oil producers and Capitol Hill lobbyists are the primary beneficiaries of this war of choice. As prices hit $100 easily due to fear and supply disruption, those selling at the spot price are seeing record margins. But for the rest of the global ledger, this 40% spike in diesel is a tax on the entire supply chain. It creates a chain reaction where factories cannot supply goods because the transportation cost exceeds the product's value. We aren't just looking at expensive fuel, we are looking at the potential for physical shortages on store shelves. The most dangerous entry in our audit today is the total collapse of international cooperation. Energy economist Anas Al-Haji has noted that even if the US releases its strategic petroleum reserve, it remains a limited tool against a potential 10 million barrel per day loss. We are entering the force majeure era. Qatar's warning that all Gulf exporters will have to call a force majeure in the next few days means that legal contracts are being torn up. In my profession, a force majeure is the ultimate audit failure. It means the system has broken down so completely that legal obligations no longer apply. This leads to a scramble for inventory, where countries like China might ban their own exports to protect their domestic stability, leaving their trade partners, including the US and Europe, to deal with the vacuum. As we conclude our forensic look at the great energy freeze of 2026, we have to address a technical reality that many politicians ignore: the permanent impairment of assets. Kuwait and Iraq aren't just slowing down production, they are shutting in wells because their storage tank farms are at 100% capacity. In accounting, when you take an asset offline, you have to assess its recoverable value. In the oil business, shutting in a well is a measure of last resort because it risks long-term damage to reservoir pressure. Restarting production isn't like flipping a switch. It can take days or weeks of expensive technical intervention. We are looking at a physical degradation of the world's productive capacity that will keep prices elevated long after the last drone is shot down. This is an operational default caused by a lack of exit routes through the Strait of Hormuz. The data shows that Asia, particularly China, is facing an incoming shock that could easily morph into a full-scale financial crisis. While the US tries to manage its own domestic narrative, the global ledger shows that 3/4 of the oil that usually flows through Hormuz goes to China, India, and Japan. If China bans its own exports to protect its internal stability, the wealth effect that has supported global consumption will evaporate overnight. Stock markets are already facing catastrophic pressures, and bond markets are repricing risk at a rate we haven't seen in decades. As a CPA, I recognize this as systemic deleveraging. When the cost of energy spikes 20% in a week, exceeding the Ukraine war's initial impact, the risk-free assumptions of the last decade are officially dead. The final audit of Operation Epic Fury and the subsequent energy freeze shows a world that is strategically insolvent. Trump promised $50 oil, but he has delivered a world where $150 Brent is a distinct possibility. Qatar's energy minister warned that this will bring down the economies of the world if it continues for even a few more weeks. We have a war of choice that the Pentagon admits wasn't necessary, yet it has triggered a force majeure era where international law and trade contracts are being discarded. The audit failure here is total. The administration ignored the supply chain vulnerabilities, ignored the warnings of the allies, and ignored the basic laws of energy logistics. But the most important question remains for you. As gas prices march toward $5 and the global energy engine seizes up, Do you believe this was a necessary price for freedom, or are we watching the self-inflicted implosion of the American economy? Let me know in the comments below. Your perspective is the only audit that matters when the official ledger is hidden behind redactions. I'm Camilo Motato, Certified Public Accountant for Thu News. Thank you for staying for this 10-minute strategic autopsy. Subscribe to stay informed, stay ahead of the numbers, and stay safe.